Well, in terms of complexity, I think our view at Saybrook, and my view that I have developed over time, is that we're really in a place where there's so many forces upon our lives, on our organizations, on the way we are living and working, that we don't really fully understand, right? Things are changing rapidly before our eyes. The fact that we have so much access through the internet, through, to what's going on in the world, to understanding the sciences of climate change, whatever they may be, we have a lot coming at us. The change is happening at a more rapid pace, and we are in a position of having to make critical decisions around that change very rapidly, right? Because the change is happening so rapidly. We don't have time to sit around and figure out what are we going to do in 5 years. We really have to make decisions quickly. So I think all of these factors are what are bearing down on leaders today that are creating that experience they're having of complexity. It's like, while we have lots of information, we never have all the information we need to make a decision. Part of what we're talking about in terms of complex adaptive systems is that they're unpredictable, and we can't use the same knowledge we've used in the past to predict what's going to happen in the future. Climate change and our predictions around it change every year because we don't really have a clue, what's happening if we look at all of the factors involved, and we don't know what's going to, how it's going to impact us. So we have to make the best decisions we can with the information we have, on a more timely basis. And in my opinion, and I think the opinion of a lot of others, what that means is, how do we get more voices involved, more perspectives involved, so that we're not just relying on a few leaders to make a decision, but they have the perspective and of many people as they come together and bring information together. So this really begins to lead to the place of, how do we create more collaborative organizations, more collaborative systems, more new ways of working together, new ways of being in a relationship. It's been interesting that I have had, as I get sort of every time somebody goes on to my academia.edu site and taps into that paper, I get a notice that says how many times it's been read. And I've been shocked at how often it is being picked up by people around the world. So this interest in generative inquiry, I think, is out there. And so our session tonight that Dan Leahy and I are doing is really what we're calling it is playing with complexity, because I think we're kind of beyond the point of saying dealing with complexity, but complexity is a part of our lives at this point in time. So we have to embrace it in a way that we begin to play with it, dance with it, get comfortable with the reality that is with us, that's unlikely not going to go away in our lifetime. And I think the younger generations today they're growing up in a whole different world than we're growing up with. So complexity will look very different to them than it does to us. May not even look complex, who knows? Because their brains are, I think, being wired in a very different way to manage complexity. But the reality of what we're faced with today is, so how do we work with that complexity? And I think that at the core of it is our ability to be in inquiry together in a generative way. So what does that mean? It's like I draw a lot upon the work of David Bohm's dialogical approach, which is a deep kind of dive or drilling down to the meaning of something, really examining assumptions upon which we have built our frameworks around what's possible, what's not possible. And at the same time, we're kind of drilling down and trying to understand those assumptions. My experience has been when we unlock the assumptions, when we begin to really surface them, bring them to a place where we can challenge them, rethink them, think beyond the assumptions. So that is when we begin to get generative, right? That we begin to be able to think thoughts that we haven't thought before, really come up with ideas that are new, not just a rehashing of what we've done before. And so the generative inquiry, when when you experience it, and I've most often experienced it in a dialogue session where people you can see that the sparks that are coming up as people are saying, wow, but what if that assumption isn't true? What if it's not something I have to hold on to? Can I think a new thought? Similar to what you were talking about earlier, Jose, that if we're working with climate change and we have to redesign our cities and our spaces and our way of living, we have to think beyond what we have thought in the past is possible. We have to think of new possibilities, and I think it's through a process of letting go, right, of what was, of what we have been sure of in the past, that leads to that spark of creativity or generativity in our thinking and our communication processes, and even in the way we're in relationship with one another. So when we think about a culture that is organizational culture that is generative in nature, it means that what you would see around are people constantly sort of talking with each other, popping new ideas constantly, taking them back to a larger group of people, saying, well, what do you think about this idea? Let's talk about what the possibilities are here. And it's almost like you have this, it's like you're generating these new ideas, this new thinking that just creates, I think, an excitement. It also creates a connection amongst people, so they stop kind of they start getting out of their old patterns of just working in their cubicles individually to really wanting to be in a space that's more creative. What I write about a lot is the idea of how we need to shift our assumptions, or our understanding of self in this kind of U.S., Northern European cultures of self as an individual entity to self as always in relationship, and which I think is much more attuned to a lot of the Asian cultures, Native American cultures, that had that knowing that we weren't as individual persons, separate from others, separate from the environment, that connection is always present. So this is I think on the U.S. Northern European part is a relearning, we might say, of an ancient understanding that somewhere got lost along the way. So I think that is a core belief and assumption that needs to be shifted shifted to move to an area where we really can be truly collaborative, right? So, so to be truly collaborative means that we have to have a level of trust in the other. We have to have a level of trust in our ability to really co-create, right? And that, having that level of trust begins to, it requires us to be vulnerable, right? And one of the keys to opening up that space for transformative learning is for people to be able to be vulnerable, right? So vulnerable means that I can be in that space of unknowing, not sure what happened to all that I thought was true about, could be about who I am, about the world I'm living in, the organization I'm a part of, and to be in a space that's unknowing and at the same time open to possibilities, right? So the transformative learning theory, which really comes out of the work of Jack Mezirow and the Columbia School of Education, is a very interesting body of work that I find is so relevant to the work that we do, that we need to do now in organizational development and leadership development and sustainability work is around that transforming our frames of reference. Jack Mezirow talks about it in terms of, it's about transforming our frames of reference, which is all about who we understand we are in the context of our lives, and how we begin to do that. I also talk about that the gateway to transformation, transformative learning, is really the encounter with the other. And so when we think about that encounter, it could be an encounter with another person, encounter with another idea, encounter with another culture. But how we approach that encounter in a way that we really allow it to influence us, to shape us, to shift our thinking, to really come out in a way that we're changed as individuals, is really, that's the space of transformative learning that is so powerful when we think about the work that we need to do, out there in this world right now. Our lives, our work, our ways of being are, I think, are all going to change radically, in my lifetime, and it's going to be interesting to be a part of.